We're going to talk about Adams, Jackson, Van Buren, William Henry Harrison, and John Tyler in this section. So the campaign or the election of 1824, Andrew Jackson terms it the corrupt bargain. We'll talk about that in a minute. But as you see, popular vote, Jackson wins 43% of the vote. And the next closest is John Quincy Adams, Secretary of State. He wins 31% of the vote. But look at the Electoral College, 99 to 84. It's not a clear winner. So it goes to the House of Representatives. So as you see, Henry Clay, he wants the American system. He's from the West. John Quincy Adams, it says internal improvements, science. He's from New England. Andrew Jackson's a war hero. He's from the West. And William H. Crawford, he's the candidate from the South. So Jackson's going to call this election the corrupt bargain. He wins the popular vote. The election goes to the House of Representatives because there's not a clear winner in the Electoral College. Clay does not like Jackson, and Henry Clay is Speaker of the House, I believe, and Clay does not like Jackson. So what happens is John Quincy Adams and Henry Clay strike a bargain, and behind closed doors, without Andrew Jackson being there, and John Quincy Adams agrees to support the American system, and Henry Clay agrees to get votes for John Quincy Adams to become the next president. Upon hearing of this, Andrew Jackson calls this election the corrupt bargain. And as you see, Henry Clay, what does he get out of this as well? He also becomes the next Secretary of State. Why not Vice President? Think about it, guys. So far, Secretary of State is the pathway to the presidency. We've had more Secretary of States become president right now in 2020 than we have vice presidents win on their own terms. So Jacksonians, they're going to form a Democratic Party. They're going to form a party out of this election. It is the modern day Democratic Party. It's formed by 1828. They opposed everything they could, including the national bank tariffs. If John Quincy Adams wanted something and they wanted it and the Democrats wanted it, they opposed it simply because John Quincy Adams wanted it. So here is the election map of 1824. What this mindset does to the John Quincy Adams administration, this split would render the Adams administration pretty much ineffective. There's two parties again. What John Quincy Adams is able to do, he's able to ease voting requirements. This enlarges the voting population. Still not all people could vote. Women, slaves, they couldn't vote, but he's going to ease land requirements in federal elections, not state, but federal elections. So you don't have to own land to vote. So he wants internal improvements to build up our infrastructure, roads, canals, things of that nature. He wants a national university. He wants astronomical observatories so we can view the stars. He wants to invest in science research. Many accused him of returning to Federalist beliefs of a strong central government, things like that. Congress would only fund improving rivers, harbors, and a national road. So this is, for the most part, with John Quincy Adams, this is what he gets done, and it's not really much. So we come up on the election. We come to the election of 1828, and of course, who's going to run for president? John Quincy Adams, and yes, Andrew Jackson's going to run for president again. He's known as the People's President, or he's known as King Andrew, just depends on which way you look at it. He serves 2 terms from 1829 to 1837. So the election of 1828 is Jackson versus Adams, and Jackson is seen as the common man, the president of the common man. He's going to win the popular vote, and he's going to win the electoral votes, and he gets a lot of his votes from the South in a new area of the U.S., the West. When we're thinking of the West, don't think of like California, think of Kentucky and Tennessee, because that was the West back then. So this will be one of the dirtiest campaigns in U.S. history. It goes down as the dirtiest that we're going to talk about, and they basically swap insults. It's a mudslinging campaign. So Andrew Jackson, his nickname is Old Hickory because he's as stubborn as hickory wood, and hickory wood's very hard. Jackson's appeal to the common man and citizens, really the Southwest farmers. He portrays himself as an average man of the people, and he successfully portrays Adams as an intellectual elitist. But in reality, it's the other way around. Andrew Jackson's the elitist, and he owns property and slaves, and it's John Quincy Adams who's pretty much a career politician and an average man. So Jackson was able to reverse this stuff around, and he did it very successfully. This campaign was so harsh that Andrew Jackson's wife is going to die after the election. She dies of a heart attack. And supposedly what happens is, I believe she's out in Tennessee or Kentucky, one of those areas, and she overhears two men talking about her, and they talk about her as being a lady not of dignity. And she's so distraught by it, she goes up to her hotel room, has a heart attack, and dies. So for the rest of his life, really, and all of his presidency, Andrew Jackson's famous for wearing the black coat, the white shirt, and the bow tie, and he doesn't change his dress ever. He does this because he mourns his wife's death the whole time he's president. And he blames what will become the Whigs, and he blames John Quincy Adams for his wife's death. So she was not, like, they were talking about her being a lady of ill repute and stuff like that, which there's a whole marriage thing that goes on here with Jackson. And if you want to watch it, this is right here. This video is a good video for you to watch. It's like 5-6 minutes long, but this is the dirtiest campaign in U.S. history. So Jackson wins. First time a candidate from the West has won west of the Appalachians. So once again, think of the West as Tennessee. Spoil system. So it's a practice of appointing people to government jobs on the basis of party loyalty and support. Jackson believed this was a more democratic process, opening up for just ordinary citizens to become government officials. This will end up having to be reformed in the 1880s. It's going to need to be reformed before then, but at least in the 1820s, it opens it up. It's more of a democratic process. At least Jackson feels so. So the electoral system, as you see, Jackson's going to replace caucuses with a national nominating convention to decide the party's presidential nominee. Both parties have these today. So think about what you see in election years when the Democrats and Republicans all gather in a city and they nominate their president. This is what Andrew Jackson created. He wanted to have a national nominating convention instead of people in back rooms and party leaders choosing the president. He said, hey, the people should choose their president, and we should have a convention. So that's why you see these conventions every 4 years in the summer. He has to deal with the Tariff of Abominations in 1828. Basically, manufactured goods from England were very expensive. It will make manufactured goods from England very expensive. Southerners, in particular South Carolinians, threatened to secede from the Union. They don't like having to pay more for goods. Tariffs, once again, raise prices. It encourages American manufacturing, but in the end, you raise prices. So even if you can produce an American good that's cheaper, it's going to be more expensive than if it were tariff-free. So that's why South Carolinians, who have to buy a lot of stuff from Britain, they threaten to secede. Vice President John C. Calhoun, under Jackson, decides to support the idea of nullification instead of secession. So he's going to write this theory about it, and we'll talk about it here on the next slide. So he's going to decide to favor nullification, which is not as radical as secession. And as you see, the problem simmers here for now. What he does is he writes this nullification theory in 1828, and John C. Calhoun writes this theory is based on the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, which we've already studied. This theory says if the federal government passes a law that a state does not agree with, the state has the right to null and void that law. In other words, they don't have to enforce it. Remember, in the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, it was more of if it's unconstitutional. John C. Calhoun's saying if the state doesn't like the law, they can null and void it. So, meaning a state had the right to not enforce a federal law. Now, guys, you can go back to the Constitution, remember Supremacy Clause. Virginia and Kentucky resolutions basically created this thing called interposition. And remember, this is where states work together for change. So basically what he's saying is enough states not following a federal law, but they're loyal in all other aspects, you're going to force the federal government to change this law. So in 1830, you have the Webster-Hayne Debates or Webster-Hayne Debates. And in the Senate, you have Robert Hayne from South Carolina. He argued for states' rights. And you have Daniel Webster from Massachusetts, and he is a defender of the Union. The big thing you need to remember about this is this actually is going to be an argument over whether slavery should exist and slavery should not. But it's the big things you need to remember. It argues for states' rights versus the Union, a more nationalistic approach. So everybody in 1830 is waiting to hear how Jackson's going to side, if he's going to agree with states' rights or is he going to agree that the Union has the ultimate authority. And so Jackson, for about a month, people were just waiting to see what he's going to say because he is a man from Tennessee and he's a man from the West. And so, if you had your money on it, you'd say Jackson's going to go with South Carolina Senator Robert Hayne and argue for states' rights. However, he says the Union must be preserved. He said very simply, the Union must be preserved. In other words, you got to look at things as more nationalistic. He's a defender of the Union and not states' rights. So this actually does surprise quite a few people. But as president, he speaks for all of the states. So you have the Tariff of 1833, then you have the Force Bill of 1833, and then you're going to get the Compromise of 1833. And we're going to talk about this, guys. Not one time are we going to mention slavery. And there's quite a few times I'm going to mention that we're going to go to war. And we've got states going to secede from the Union over a tariff. So this is going to help you in the future, especially when we get to Civil War and we talk about this. You got to understand the Civil War is dealing with states' rights versus the federal government's rights. And then later on, it's going to mix slavery in there. So this bill, this whole thing here is a good precursor to what you're going to need to know in the future, because this is all about states' rights versus the federal government's rights. In 1832, you get new tariffs that are passed. South Carolina's still mad from the nullification, or they're still mad from the Tariff of Abominations in 1828. And so in 1832, we get a new set of tariffs coming along. And remember, southern states do not like tariffs because it makes foreign goods more expensive to them. And they're buying a lot of foreign goods. So Jackson considered nullification as treason, and Jackson threatens to hang the vice president. He threatens to hang John C. Calhoun for treason. And guys, when Andrew Jackson says he's going to do something, you don't take it lightly, because he always followed through. He didn't make idle threats. They were promises. And he actually was going to hang the vice president for treason. So Congress will end up passing the Force Bill. The Force Bill makes it, the Force Bill gives power to the military to enforce Congress's laws. And it looks like we're headed for civil war. South Carolina was going to secede. There were quite a few other states in the South that were looking to secede because they did not agree with these high tariffs, because it makes goods more expensive to them. So Henry Clay, this is the second time we're going to mention Henry Clay pushing through a compromise. This is why he's known as the Great Compromiser. Because remember, with the Missouri Compromise, we were going to war, and we had states threatening to leave. And he pushes through the Missouri Compromise, or the Compromise of 1820. In 1833, we have states that are going to leave. We actually have a president that's going to hang a vice president. And Henry Clay pushes through the Compromise of 1833. It's important you know this, because it prevents us from war. And this